Ube halaya is a delicious purple yam jam that goes great with many desserts, pandesal, and you can even eat it alone by the spoonful. When I visited the Philippines a couple years ago, I was literally eating ube halaya all the time. The ube flavor is so addicting, and it's one you desperately need to try if you haven't had it already. And now I guess your only problem is, if you don't live in the Philippines, is that, where do I find ube? Many Filipino stores in the US do carry frozen and pre-grated ube, but it can be hard to find it fresh. I visited my local Filipino store and I picked up this. The produce sign says it's ube, but after doing a little bit of research, it turns out this is actually an Okinawan sweet potato. Ube has a rough and dark brown outer skin, kind of similar to tree bark, versus this where it has a smooth and lighter skin. But the bright side is that it's still purple on the inside, and the taste is very similar to ube. So if you're able to get your hands on real fresh ube, I highly recommend you use that. But if you're like me and you live in the States, a purple Okinawan sweet potato is going to work great as well. So for this recipe, you're going to need 5 pounds or 2¼ kilos of raw ube. This is to make a large batch, so if you don't want to make so much, just divide all the ingredient amounts by 2. After thoroughly rinsing the outside of your ube, cut it into thick rounds using a very sharp knife with the skin on. And try your best to cut the pieces close to the same size. When you're finished chopping up your ube, transfer it to a bowl or container filled with water. As soon as you cut your ube and it's exposed to oxygen, it's going to rapidly start losing its vibrant purple color due to oxidation. By submerging the ube in water, it will limit the amount of oxygen that it's exposed to, and it will greatly slow down this process. If you feel any soft and squishy parts on your yam or sweet potato, that means that area is rotten, and if you cut into it, it's going to be brown and unappetizing. But that doesn't mean the whole thing is bad. Just keep trimming off parts until you reach that vibrant purple color again. The best way to cook ube is going to be to steam it. Arrange the pieces in one layer inside the steamer basket, and only cut up as much ube that will fit inside the basket at a time. Steam the ube for about 30 minutes or until tender, and a fork when inserted easily pierces the ube. If you're using frozen pre-grated ube, you're still going to need to cook it. To do so, wrap it up in a cheesecloth and steam it until tender. If you don't have a steamer basket, you can also cook your ube in a pot of boiling water. But one of the advantages to steaming is that it allows us to hold on to as much of that vibrant purple and ube flavor as possible. When boiling in a pot of water, a lot of the ube flavor and purple color is going to leach out into the water. So if you are going the boiling route, only use just enough water to barely cover the ube. When finished steaming, allow the ube to cool down until you can handle it without being burned. And when it has cooled down, use the smooth side of a fork to help peel off the skin. And with some of the pieces, you might be able to even pop it out whole like an onion ring. Once all of the skin has been removed, use a potato masher to mash up the ube. And if you don't have one, you can also do this using a fork. And if during the mashing process you see any roots, you can take those out. So I actually let my ube cool down for too long. I wasn't able to get too good of a mash before bringing it back to the stove and adding it into a large wide pot over medium heat. Add in 2 12-ounce cans of evaporated milk and continue mashing. After all of the evaporated milk has been absorbed by the ube, add in 2 14-ounce cans of condensed milk. Mix up everything again using the potato masher, and don't forget to add in 6 grams of salt. A potato masher does an okay job of breaking up the ube, but it's never going to get us that smooth and luxurious texture that we're going for. To do that, we're really going to need to use a blender, and if you have an immersion blender, it's going to be awesome for this step. But if you don't, you can do this step in batches using a normal countertop blender. Even though it hasn't been cooking for too long, the ube jam is already going to be overwhelmingly thick for the blender. You can thin it out with some water, but that means you're going to have to cook it for a lot longer. Instead, I recommend that you just blend it a little bit at a time throughout the cooking process. And when you feel like the blender is starting to get warm, stop and continue later, because we don't want to burn out a blender. And since I don't have the real deal ube, Using some ube extract is going to be awesome for helping me get more of that delicious ube flavor. Just eyeball about a teaspoon or 2 of extract. The exact amount of time you'll need to cook your ube halaya will depend on a couple of factors. 1, how wide the pot is, and 2, how high the heat is. A wider pot is going to cook much faster, and the same goes for higher heat. But with higher heat, you're going to need to stir more vigorously because it'll be more likely to burn. So start on medium heat, and as it thickens, slowly reduce the heat to low. I cooked mine for about 30 minutes, and yes, stirring the whole time. Basically, you want to keep cooking until your ube halaya has gotten so thick, you're having an extremely hard time stirring it. When you reach that point, you can finally say that you're done. For storing the ube halaya, you have a couple options. You can store it in a mason jar, which is actually my favorite way, but if you plan on serving it by itself as a dessert, you can grease a glass dish with some butter, spoon in the ube, level it out, and while it's still warm, rub down the top with a little bit of butter. So one of the great things about mason jars is that they're perfect for the freezer. If you make a large batch of ube halaya, you can store it in the freezer, and if in a couple months down the line you want some, you just take it out to defrost, and you have freshly made ube halaya. Cover it with plastic wrap and leave it to chill in the fridge overnight. After chilling the ube halaya in the fridge overnight, it's ready to serve. Like I said in the beginning, it's amazing by itself, and it goes really well with pandesal, ensaimada, cakes, and let's not forget halo halo. If you compare this stuff to the pre-made one in the jar, it will absolutely blow it out of the water. And those who have had fresh ube halaya before know its greatness. So if you're still one of those who haven't had it already, make sure that you don't let yourself continue missing out, because I'm sure ube is going to become your new favorite dessert flavor.